Okay, we are in the final part. And basically, in this part, what we are going to do is we are going to get our object or our model to be able to move around multiple axes at the same time. Now, I'm not really going to explain much on how this works because, in general, it's above my head. I know I had information on this about in college, but that was a long time ago, and I really don't remember it all. But basically, what we're going to do is we are going to use matrix math in order to move our model. So, what's a matrix? Basically, in general, a matrix is one single object um, that contains the information on each of our axes and the amount of rotation that we want for each of those axes. Once we have a matrix created, which is not as hard as it sounds, once we have it created, we can make a transform using that matrix, and then we can just apply that transform to Spotlight as we did before. So let's kind of do it piecemeal for two reasons. Number one, it's easier to take it a little bite at a time. But second of all, if we kind of make it generic, if you want down the road, you can just copy and paste from this. You'll have the information on it, and you can, you can just reuse this. So to start off with, we need to make a matrix. So let's make our own little method to create a matrix. Okay. Okay, we are going to be making a matrix that can rotate around the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. So basically, all we need to do is give it the information on how much we want to rotate on each of those axes. So let's make a private void method. Let's call it create matrix. And we will send it a double value. Let's name this about x rotation. In other words, what's the rotation about the x-axis or around the x-axis. We need to send it same information but for the y-axis. And let's do it for the about z-axis. Okay, so that's the information we're going to be sending to our method. So how do we create a matrix? First, we just define the object. It's a matrix 3D is what we're creating. Let's call this temp matrix. My mouse is in the way. Temp matrix, and we're just gonna create the new object. New matrix 3D. Okay, now this part is coming in. I'm not going to really explain it because I don't know how I could. But basically, to the matrix, we need to add rotation information for each of our axes with the amount of rotation we want. So let's take our temp matrix, give it a rotation value, rotate, and this is the part I don't know that I could explain. Quaternion, I believe is how it's pronounced. We are going to create a new one of those. And the quaternion has two things we need to give it. One, we need to give it the axis vector, just as we did in the previous example, and the amount of rotation. So let's give it the vector for the x-axis. New vector 3D. The x-axis is 1 for the x, 0 for the y and z. Okay, so that defines we're talking about that axis, and we need to give it the amount of angles in degrees. Well, we're sending that information. So it's about X rotation. All right, let's just get the correct number of parentheses here and a semicolon. Okay, so now we need to add the information for the y-axis. Rotate, and this is Newtonian. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. Kind of a funny word, so. Axis 3D, we're going to do it for the y-axis, which is 0 for the x, 1 for the y, 0 for the z. And then we'll give this about the y rotation. And then we'll just give it a last one. Rotate about the z-axis. So all this information is going to be held in this one matrix object. Zero, 0, and 1 for the z. And this is going to be our about z rotation. Like I said, the nice way of doing this in its own little object is we don't have to do it again. Do it once and be done. Now, one thing I messed up, we should be returning this. We actually want to return a matrix 3D object because we want to return the temp matrix that we made. So go ahead and return temp matrix. See, it wasn't that bad. I mean, we just made our our matrix, and now we have all the information we really need. So now that we can create our matrix, we need to actually use it. And what we'll do is we'll create another method. This is going to be a void method. This is where we're actually going to do the rotation. This is kind of like our rotate horizontal method from before. Let's just call it move spotlight. Spotlight. Okay. And we're not sending it any information. Let's just close these off. Now, what do we need to do? Number one, we said we needed a matrix. Okay, let's create a new matrix. This is our actual 3D matrix. Let's just call it matrix equals. Now we have something that will actually make our matrix for us. So let's just call that method. Create matrix. And we need to send it the values. Now this is where a little bit of thinking has to come along. What rotates about the x-axis? The x-axis would be kind of like the nodding or the up and down. So that will be our vertical motion will rotate around the x-axis. So we need to send it the rotation value for that, which would be this model controls 1, the index of 1, because that was our second one that we took care of, dot rotate angle. Okay, now what rotates about the y-axis? That would be a tilting left and right. We're not doing that, so we're just going to give it a 0. Just send it a 0. And then the about z rotation, which would be the left to the right or the horizontal movement. This dot model controls, and that was index of 0, and that is, we need the rotate angle. Okay, so now we have our nice, pretty little matrix object created. Now all we need to do is we need to create a transform using that matrix. Like I said before, the transforms is actually what can be applied to our 3D model. So what we want to do is we're going to make a matrix 3D transform, or matrix transform 3D, sorry. We'll just call this transform equals a new matrix transform 3D, and we're just going to include that, and we're going to make that passing it our actual matrix. Now we have our transform. Now we just have to apply it. Just as before, we want to apply it to the entire spotlight. So let's do spotlight. We want to change its transform to our new transform. And believe it or not, folks, that is it. Now, I'm not saying that you understand exactly what we did. I'm not sure I understand exactly what we just did, but let's test it out and see if it works. All right, we build it. Let's go into Vixen. Open up our little testing sequence. Check in add-ins. Okay, we're going to have both checked. And hey, it's not moving right. You know why? Because I did a boneheaded move. And I'll show you what that move is in 2 seconds. When we get our update settings, we still have it calling the rotate horizontal, which was the first method. So let's just rem that out. And then we want to call move spotlight instead. So let's call move spotlight, semicolon. Now that we actually have it trying to use our matrix, let's see how it works. All right, it's coming up. We have our spotlight, and look at that. We can move it all over the place. And that's basically it. You guys, that's totally it on creating your own object. Now, obviously, they can get a lot more involved, depending how many controls you want to have. But the basics of this being designed, if you, for example, let's just real quickly, let's just set all the center, and let's just record something real quick. We have our movements. In fact, the music's probably drowning me out right now, but we move it around. The nice part about this is if we add the object preview, that same object will be used that we just created. So we should be able to get a nice little preview of our object moving around. Pretty cool, huh? So that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. More than willing to help on anything I can. All right, take care.